Joe Biden and the Democrats are calling for peace and unity, but they refuse to condemn acts of violence and destruction by Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Thank you for listening to The Independent Paradox. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit that like button, turn on your notifications, and also please share. And feel free to comment. Comments are always welcome here, as well as open discussion. So this is all we hear about from Democrats and Joe Biden's spokespeople. We should now just all be united and fighting for the same cause. All of a sudden, after 4 years of the Democratic Party and media and tech all attacking President Trump and his supporters, after years of investigations and an impeachment based on fake information, now we should just forget about all that, just hold hands and get along. Democrats wanted us to believe that if Joe Biden won the presidency, that he would be the one to bring this country together, and just overnight the protesting and riots would end and we would just be one big happy country. Problem is, it's never what Antifa or the Black Lives Matter movement want or have wanted. They have said and continue to say so. They couldn't care less who the president is. But the Biden campaign, they did their job and they blamed all this divisiveness on the Trump administration and not on the real problem. BLM and Antifa are continuing to protest and riot. We just don't hear about it for whatever reason that they can come up with. They are already making unreasonable demands of the most likely incoming administration, of Joe Biden's administration. And of course, Joe Biden is staying silent on most of these issues. The Democrats wanted to blame the president for all of the rioting and violence. But, it all started during the Obama administration. Black Lives Matter started in 2013, right in the middle or the beginning of Obama's second term. Democrats used all the violence as leverage against the Trump campaign, saying that once Biden is elected, he would be able to make it all stop. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. It's not going to work that way. The calls for defunding the police for things that have mostly happened during the course of protecting themselves or others is continuing. These protesters and rioters, they don't care who's in office. They are just going to continue to do what they're doing, any rioting, protesting, destruction of property, until someone gives in to all of their demands. Are you seeing anything on the front page of CNN or Yahoo or MSNBC? Of course not. We aren't seeing anything on the news about the protests in South Los Angeles over squatters being evicted. Not seeing the mobs pushing the police officers down the street. We aren't hearing about the protest outside of the LA mayor's house over Biden considering him for a position in his cabinet. Not hearing about the BLM protesting that over the possibility, because the mayor refused to cut the LA Police Department's budget by 90%. So they don't want him to be a part of the president's cabinet because he wasn't willing to defund the police. The media knows these groups don't want unity. They just want their way. But they aren't going to report on it because it would undermine their whole narrative of Joe Biden being the American savior, the president for all Americans, no matter what side you're on. It's just it doesn't fit into that narrative. They aren't going to report on what real problems are happening. What few questions are being asked of Biden and his team about these protests and violence, they're either being ignored, and the media doesn't care, or Biden's team is just deflecting. He is just going to continue to be tossed easy questions, and no one cares if he has any actual answers or even if anything that he says makes any sense. Whenever any groups that proclaim their allegiance to President Trump gather for a peaceful protest, you can count on BLM and Antifa showing up. And of course, you can always count on these peaceful protests are going to turn violent when it happens. All you hear from the right is that it's groups of white supremacists and that BLM was there as a counter protest. Of course, none of this is true. They're going there to incite violence. These are the only protests that you're going to hear about on mainstream media. The protests that Trump supporters might be at so that the media can push their narrative of how terrible and violent and racist anyone that supports Trump is. That's what you're going to hear about. Yes, we have groups in this country that are white supremacists, neo-Nazis, but no, these protests that the media are reporting as being white supremacists, they're just simply not that. It only fits the narrative the media wants if they call them white supremacists, so that when BLM and or Antifa show up and start causing problems, then they can blame it on someone other than who is causing the violence. If the Democratic Party truly wanted unity, after not, they wouldn't just be wanting everyone just to fall in line. They would denounce the violence by BLM and Antifa, and as they would, say to Trump, denounce it by name, call it out for what it is. They spent years criticizing the president for what they say was his refusal to denounce white supremacy, even though, as we've all seen, he's done it dozens of times. Yet they won't denounce the groups that are actually responsible for the majority of violence currently happening in our country. We are a divided country, and that's exactly what the Democrats want. They believe that is their path to gain control of the country, to implement what I and many others consider their socialist policies. The crazy thing is, you've got all of these woke liberals demanding less government control and less police, and they're electing a president that wants to have bigger government and more control. Really? Do they think they are going to have a government that just gives them everything they want and won't demand control of their lives in exchange for it? All of these woke liberals need to wake up. I don't believe the majority of Democratic politicians think the way this loud minority of the party does. Most just aren't willing to push back for fear of losing votes. I would think the results of the recent Senate and House races would convince the Democrats that are afraid to speak up that the majority of Americans believe there is a problem with the Democratic Party. Even if Biden takes office in January, it's only because the majority of Democratic voters believe he will be more moderate than the rest of the party, and millions of Americans were convinced by mainstream media and big tech that Trump is a terrible person and only Joe Biden can make all the violence stop. At this point, we can only hope that Joe Biden is actually able to complete his 4-year term. The Republicans maintain control of the Senate, and Republicans also gain control of the House at midterms, which at this point is a very strong possibility. Americans are completely fed up with the politics happening in this country. And the majority of people that voted for Biden, they didn't vote for him because they were super confident in his abilities and what he was going to do for the country. They just thought they were voting for the lesser of two evils. I mean, there's so much proof in that being the case by the gains made by the Republican Party in the House. I mean, it should be a complete and totally clear message to Trump's administration, to Biden's incoming administration, that they're not happy with the Democratic Party. We have bills currently being drafted, and I think one's being presented or next week by Cory Booker, to use tax dollars to buy land from white farmers and give it free and clear to black farmers, all in the name of equity and redistribution of wealth. But again, it's using my tax dollars and your tax dollars. The strangest thing about this is there's no mention of giving this land to those who claim it was actually stolen from them. The biggest push from the far right that is happening now has moved far past equality. It is solely focusing on what they want to call equity. The strangest thing to me about this, you have groups on the right complaining that minorities are disproportionately affected by violence and by incarceration, but then they're okay if you want to disproportionately give them opportunities. You have calls for movie production companies to start having equal numbers of minorities in movies and in their productions. You have the NFL fielding all black officiating crews. You have companies all over the U.S. creating groups within their HR departments with the sole purpose of hiring minorities. I am all for equality, but I am in no way for the hiring of any sort in any industry based on practices that give advantage to any group of people based on race. I don't care if you're black or white or Hispanic. No one should have an advantage over someone else based on the color of their skin. If practices are put into place to make hiring decisions based on your color, you are only creating more division in this country. You're going to create hostile work environments where employees aren't going to believe that that minority that is being hired was hired based on their performance or qualifications. You should be hiring based on performance and company fit and experience. I mean, if you have a population that we do in the U.S. that is 76% white, then logically you should expect that most businesses, I'm going to say most, are going to have demographics inside that business that fall in line with the demographics of the United States. You can't expect to have a minority population having 50% of more jobs and promotions. That's what's trying to be created. Just hire the person that deserves the job and promote the person that deserves it. Don't discriminate against anyone. Now, I know that many are going to say that after hundreds of years of discrimination that have held minorities out of certain positions and promotions, that's what's owed. And it's true that that's what happened in our past, but there's no way to go back and fix the problems of our past. And we cannot create more division in this country by trying to turn the clock back. That's all you're going to do is create division. You're only going to create, if you do that, if you try to make your hiring practices where no matter what, you're hiring someone of minority and you're hiring someone, if you try to make it 50-50 minority and non-minorities, if you do that, you're only going to create a group of people, a new group of people that are being discriminated against. Reparations will not create equality or equity. It will only create division. You cannot fix racism with racism. The Democratic Party's call for unity, it's empty. We all know the only unity they want is your agreement. We cannot be a united country when the Democratic Party is only worried about their own interest. We cannot be a united country by offering any group of people an advantage over another group of people. Slavery was a terrible thing. It was a terrible stain on our history. It caused irreparable harm to parts of our country. Slavery was putting one group of people above another group of people. And like I just said, you can't fix racism with racism. How can you possibly decide what family or descendant of a slave is owed and who isn't? You're even going to create more of a divide in the black community with some demanding more, claiming their ancestors were more responsible than someone else's ancestors for the wealth in our country. Reparations won't work. Even if there is systemic racism in our country, reparations can't fix that either. This is currently where we are with the BLM and Antifa movement. Demands for reparations, demands for equity. demands that Joe Biden meet with the BLM leaders, demands that Joe Biden pays back the black community for their vote, demands that if aren't met, we can be assured would lead to more violence. Is this what the Democratic Party is going to consider unity? The American people giving in to organizations that have been promoting riots and violence, organizations that have been attacking innocent people sitting outside restaurants eating. You will never have the support of tens of millions of Americans on any cause for unity if you won't even condemn those responsible for senseless acts of violence and property destruction. Thank you for listening to The Independent Paradox. If you like what you've heard, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on those notifications.